Hi there, I'm Amy Griffiths and I'm one of the journalists in Manx Radio's newsroom. And on this episode of Newscast, we're asking what barriers there are stopping people with disabilities getting involved in Manx politics. That's because it was the topic of conversation at a workshop hoping to make Tynwald more accessible. I went along and spoke to some of the people who attended.
I'm Lucy Buxton and I'm the CEO of the Manx Deaf Society. I think it's a very important discussion. I'm very pleased that Kerry Sharp MLC has put this together because there were a wide range of different people around the table today talking. From a hearing loss point of view, it's a hidden disability. A lot of people will not realise that someone has hearing loss, but they also don't realise that how limiting that can be when you actually want to interact and take part. So in terms of if I wanted to stand as a candidate, for example, what accessibility is there for me? If I was to attend a hustings meeting, will I be able to hear fellow people on the stand? Will I be able to hear people within the hall? How will that be arranged? If I was successful and elected, will I be able to follow what happens in Tynwald Chamber? I know there are some accessibility arrangements in there. Would they actually support me? I don't know. And that can actually put people off, that fear of not knowing. It's all very well saying, well, if you were to be elected, then we'd put something in place. How quickly could that be put in place? How included would I feel? So a lot of the time people would just think, do you know what, I'll not get involved. It's much safer to not do that and be rejected.
And what do you think about some of the action points that have come out from today's meeting? Do you feel optimistic that there might be some improvements to hopefully getting more people with some kind of disability involved in politics to get their voice heard?
There's been a wide range of things discussed today. And I have to be positive, yes, because I think if you don't come into a discussion like this feeling positive, then you're not going to have a positive outcome. Certainly the people, the members of Tynwald Legislative Council who are here today have expressed that they are very positive about this and they want to drive this change forward. It's not going to be something that happens overnight. It is a work in progress. But as we become a more inclusive society, we are going to have more people getting involved. So it's got to be a positive thing.
And to really have an inclusive society, you do need to have people of all walks of life within the government, within Parliament, to really be able to get that representation across. Do you agree?
I certainly do agree. There's been, if you look back historically, including women in Parliament, those figures are changing. There was discussion around positive discrimination. Should that be included here? Is there a way of doing that? I'm not sure that that is the best way to go forward because you want the best person for the job. From our point of view, if you think about it, 1 in 6 of the population has some degree of hearing loss. Is that reflected in that chamber? At the moment, no, it isn't. So that question is why not? There were people here who are wheelchair users. How many wheelchair users are there in Tynwald? None. So yes, if you're going to have a parliament that represents and works for the people, they have to have a knowledge and understanding of the people, and therefore they have to come from the people. So that wider range of people accessing and taking part and being representative should be there.
And so for anyone listening who's from any of those communities and thinking that this might appeal to them, what would your message be to them?
Research it, talk to someone, maybe get in contact with Kerry Sharp or Sarah Maltby. They were 2 of the people here today. We also had Dawn Kinnish. They are interested, so they are here now. They will be able to give you some ideas and will be able to talk to you about, okay, well, what might be a difficulty for you that can possibly be addressed? Is there something already in the works, something coming down through the pipeline that you're not aware of that would actually make that difference, that would then say, yes, actually, that would mean I could get involved and my voice would be heard?
I'm Catherine Williams, currently on Commissioner.
And what did you think of today's discussion?
Yeah, it was good. I have to say it was good. It was disappointing in a way, and that's not to get at the organisers. It's disappointing in a way that this day and age that discussions like this had to happen. I think we're in 2024, and anybody should be able to access, if they want to stand for political positions, they should be able to have the opportunity to do that.
And you are a political member yourself, not of Tynwald, but of your local commissioners. And what kind of barriers, if any, did you face when you were standing?
Well, there were basic access barriers initially, in that I couldn't access the boardroom. We had no lift in at the time, but once I was elected, we had to move to a place that was accessible, and then eventually a lift was put in. But I have to say the most important thing was the reason I stood was not for disability reasons. I wanted to stand because I felt and hoped I'd have something to offer the community. That was nothing to do with the disability. I'm a tenant, so I could bring that sort of angle. I'm also a woman, obviously, so there aren't that many women involved in politics. So there are all sorts of reasons. Obviously, I couldn't ignore the fact that I had a disability, but that wasn't and never would be for me the reason I stood.
There's a lot more to you as a person than your disability, basically, really.
I think that's the case for everybody who has a disability, and the whole thing of, having discussions like this is sad, really, in a way, and that's not to get at people. It's to say, well, why shouldn't somebody with a disability be involved? Because disability is part of them, but they've got a lot more to offer than having a visual impairment or being a wheelchair user or whatever. They have all sorts of things because they have as many negative and positive experiences of life in general as anybody else does, and make as many mistakes too.
I'm so sorry, guys. I'm really sorry. Just because I'm recording an interview. Sorry. I'm so sorry. Thank you. Thank you. I'm sorry. And so what could Tynwald particularly then be doing more of to be able to encourage more people to be able to feel like they can get involved in politics and there is something that is accessible to them?
There are basic things you need to look at, which is the access issues, not just as we were hearing today, for someone like me who's a wheelchair user, but you've got people with visual impairments, hearing impairments who maybe feel they can't access things because that there are just little slight differences that could be made to change things. But I think it's attitude of mind, not just for people within Tynwald, but society generally, to say, well, actually, just because that person's a wheelchair user doesn't mean they haven't got a brain that can offer something. And that I never actually stood on the disability ticket because, quite rightly, I would get nowhere with it. Because you have to have more than that. And I think I do. And I make just as many mistakes as anybody else, and that's nothing to do with my disability. That's just me.
You're just a human.
Yeah, and that, I think, is what people need to see. They need to see past and a lot of it's mental barriers, I think, of not just people with disabilities, but society generally.
And do you think the way of overcoming that is to see more people more visibly in positions like in government who have visible disabilities, or not visible disabilities, but who are able to show things from that perspective and be part of everyday life?
I think it's difficult to separate things, really, because you don't want people to think, I only got voted in because I've got a disability. It's because I actually want to make a positive difference to the community, the constituency I live in, particularly if you're talking about national politics. There are national issues that affect me as a woman, as a person who is under 50, and there are other people who may have disabilities but have families as well. So they have other issues to deal with, but everyday issues that anyone could deal with, and it's having the access to get over those, I think.
You're a local commissioner at the moment. Would you ever be tempted by national politics?
Possibly, but at the moment, no. And that's nothing to do with access. I think there's enough to do at a local level. And sometimes, how can I say this? Sometimes my fear would be that I'd lose touch with local people if you're dealing with national issues. You've got to focus on those without losing sight of who elected you, obviously. But you've got to focus on those. And I've got other things I want to do, and life's too short to just sort of, I'll go into politics. And I've got other things I want to do. I don't know how long I'll be able to be in a position to do them. I wouldn't rule it out, but
not right now.
Not now, no.
Member of the Legislative Council, Kerry Sharp, organised the event. She's been speaking to Christian Jones.
Well, it was a really interesting discussion, actually, and I'm glad that it took place, and I think that it was of use going forward. So we had some members attend who do have disabilities. We had some representatives of charities which represent people with disabilities. And we had at least one member who does have a hidden disability themselves. So it was a valuable discussion. We touched on some aspects which I think could be solved relatively easily, perhaps. Fingers crossed. For example, we had two representatives from the Alzheimer's Society, and they were talking, so this isn't necessarily about access to political office, but the discussion moved on to actual voting. And so, whether you have Alzheimer's or not, you're on the voting list. And they were talking about how in the lead up to elections, they often have discussions with people who are very clear about who they want to vote for in an election, but then come the day of the election, they've forgotten that it is an election and they've forgotten who it was that they wanted to vote for. So, in terms of democracy, can we do anything about that? And I think we can. I mean, possibly we could extend the postal vote perhaps to people with Alzheimer's or dementia, and then put some kind of process in around that, so that perhaps people in moments of clarity can make a decision, and set their postal vote down, and then that can be included on the day of election. So, maybe that's something we can look at and sort out. Something else we talked about was there was a representative of people with learning disabilities. So this wasn't in terms of people necessarily standing for office, but again, it was to do with the fact that people with learning disabilities are some of the most vulnerable in our society, and we don't have any direct method in place for hearing the voices of those people and letting them take part in the democratic process. So that's a discussion that we will be taking up with the person who raised this yesterday. We were lucky to have a person attend who is a local commissioner and has been for 13 years, who happens to have a disability. So that was really valuable to hear from that person about their experiences in politics. And as that person said, disability as such has never been their raison d'etre for becoming involved in politics. They just happen to have a disability. But it was interesting to sort of talk about the challenges with that person. We also had a young person who has a disability, and it was really useful to hear from their point of view about the experience that they've had going through the education system. They're still in the education system. And what that person suggested was that perhaps we should be making sure that I'm trying to remember what the subject is called now, PSHE?
Yeah, yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
That within the curriculum, there should be room for discussion about different kinds of disability, so that at school, children grow up understanding a lot more about disability. Because this person was talking about prejudice that they had come across within school. And again, this is something we can do something about now. We know that the Tynwald Chamber, House of Keys, Legislative Council are not accessible. They're not fully accessible. And that's something that I'm working on. But we can do other things as well at the same time. So looking at the curriculum, I think, will be a discussion that I now have with the Department of Education.
It is 2024. Are you at all disappointed that these are the conversations that are having to be had?
Well, yeah, because it's not just Tynwald, it's everywhere. Life is not set up for people who have disabilities, and especially since the Equality Act, we should all be aware of making things, whatever it is, housing, shops, whatever it is, it should be accessible. There was someone yesterday who has hearing loss, and they were making the very good point that if you only speak British Sign Language, for example, you're so disadvantaged in terms of being able to hear what's going on, not just in the political sphere, but news in general, because you don't necessarily read subtitles in English. You speak British Sign Language, which is a completely different language altogether. So this might be something which I could have a discussion with Manx Radio about because it is the public broadcaster. Maybe the news could be translated into British Sign Language, for example. So again, this is something which we could do something about now. What was the original question? Oh, that we should be discussing this at all. No, of course we shouldn't be. It's something which should have been addressed already, but here we are now, and I didn't even invite Tynwald members yesterday. It was supposed to just be for the public, but there were 5 members present at the workshop. So it does show that there's a lot of interest in this area, and that can only be a positive thing.
So with that in mind, what action points are being taken away? Will we actually start to see any improvements in accessibility in politics or even across the board, like you said, because it's not just in political settings?
So in the short term, I think there are a number of things we can look at. We can look at creating a channel for hearing from people with learning disabilities. We can look at how news can be accessed more readily through the public broadcaster, perhaps, in terms of British Sign Language. We can look at how people with dementia or Alzheimer's might be able to exercise their right to vote more. I'm Tynwald representative for the Parliamentarians with Disabilities Network, so I'm in regular contact across the Commonwealth and with other parliamentarians. Sorry, I'm trying to remember what point I'm trying to make here. So I'm Tynwald representative on a network called Parliamentarians with Disabilities, and that gives me access to Commonwealth funding. So I've already accessed funding and had a complete accessibility audit carried out on the Tynwald building and also the chambers. So the Department of Infrastructure has got a really nice long list of all the accessibility jobs that it needs to carry out, and it is slowly chipping away at all of these jobs. So we can see already just a few adjustments that have been made here in the Burial Suite to make the toilets completely accessible to the public. People might have noticed outside of Tynwald itself on Prospect Hill, there's now grab rails and a ramp. These are small things, but it's a start. And also through that funding, we're now going to update and have a modern hearing loop put into the Burial Suite here. So this is our public space. I think that there are other things that we can look at within the building, maybe making sure that speech-to-text technology is available, perhaps, for members of the public who might be listening to debates. In terms of people doing their job, we really have to have lift access, which gets people into Tynwald Chamber, Legislative Council House Keys. We absolutely have to have that, because if anyone is elected into Tynwald and they want to take their seat and do their job, then they have to be able to get in. Having said that, I don't think it should put anyone off standing for office, because I think if someone were to be elected into Tynwald and they happened to have a disability which meant that they used a wheelchair and they couldn't get out of the wheelchair, then I think government would have to move pretty quickly to find some kind of solution.
And let's just come on to that. The approach does appear to be, we'll fix it when someone needs it, rather than things already being in place. Why do you think the reactive approach is quite often taken?
I think because with a lot of things with government, with lack of funding, it often does come down to government being reactive, unfortunately, because there are always pressures, and there are always situations which they come to the fore when there's a need for them, an absolute urgency for them to be sorted out, unfortunately. And I think perhaps that might happen here. It might actually, at the moment, as I said, I am working on the lift aspect, but I do think that these things happen a lot quicker if someone is if someone is democratically elected into Tynwald and they can't take their seat, then that is a serious situation, and I think that government would react pretty quickly.
That's great. Anything I've missed that you wanted to cover?
No, unfortunately, I don't think there's anything else afoot at the moment.
That's all right.
Other than, I could say, I think what's also positive is that I'm the first Tynwald representative on the Parliamentarians with Disabilities Network. So I think it's a good thing that the Isle of Man has now got representation on that network, because sometimes the network is there because perhaps governments can't always make the adjustments that they need to make or should be making. But when you've got the Commonwealth behind you, you've got the weight of the Commonwealth, and certain benchmarks which parliaments throughout the Commonwealth should be reaching, then that gives you a bit more oomph.
And how does the Isle of Man compare to other parliaments from your time with that group?
Well, you've got new parliaments. For example, the Scottish Parliament is absolutely fantastic. If anyone gets the opportunity to visit the new Scottish Parliament, not only is it a beautiful building, but it is completely accessible. But of course, it's modern. Then you've got parliaments. I think it's is it St Helena? I think where Parliament is in a castle. So it just depends what kind of Parliament you've inherited. But that doesn't mean to say that ancient parliaments can't be made accessible. And I think to a certain extent the Commonwealth is quite keen on supporting the Isle of Man on its Tynwald on its accessibility journey, because it allows the Commonwealth to be able to say, look to other countries, this is the oldest continuously running parliament in the world, and look what they've done. They've made it accessible. So I think we do have a lot of Commonwealth support behind us on this.
Thank you for making it to the end of the Manx Radio newscast. You are obviously someone with exquisite taste. May I politely suggest you might want to subscribe to this and a wide range of Manx Radio podcasts at your favourite podcast provider, so our best bits will magically appear on your smartphone. Thank you.